It's time for another episode of OC Spotlight, bringing you the most incredible people doing the most amazing things. With our Public Affairs Director, Claudia Shambo, who seems to find them all. Claudia.
Hello, welcome everybody to OC Spotlight. This is the August 15th, 2018 edition. It's official. The Orange County Register posted an editorial today with a full-throated acknowledgement of human-caused climate change with these concluding words, and I quote them word for word: "Now is the time to not give in to despair, but to lobby our leaders and governments around the world, telling them to stop sticking their heads in the hot sand, believe the science, and begin a technical approach to reversing the real problem humans have brought to our planet." Well, the end of the quote. The editorial board is on board, folks. Its readers, they're welcome to join on, too. And now, what an opportune time to bring on a guest who's made a career of bringing attention to these trends. My guest is Mary Sweeters, climate and energy campaigner with Greenpeace. No, not the recruiter with the clipboard outside the grocery store. No, she's the staff member 11 years at the main office or wherever she's dispatched by Greenpeace. Her work addresses the influence of the oil industry on communities affected by oil extraction, pollution, and climate change, and advocates for a just transition to a clean energy economy. Previously, her responsibilities include campaign development for Greenpeace's USA's work to protect Arctic region, both in the U.S. and internationally, and being liaison between Greenpeace and coalition partners working to protect the Arctic region from offshore fossil fuel extraction and industrial-scale fishing. Prior to joining Greenpeace, she was a campaign organizer for CalPIRG. Mary completed her Bachelor's of Arts in Biology and Environmental Studies at UC Santa Cruz. She comes to us today from Long Beach after capping a local campaign to bring awareness to the public about Governor Brown's opportunities to exert leadership in rolling back all greenhouse gas emissions, the topic for our consideration today. Welcome to OC Spotlight, Mary Sweeters.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, first, could you just offer us just a little bit of a little trip, a little tour around the craft, the Arctic Sunrise, near where you're calling in this interview today?
Sure. One of Greenpeace's ships, the Arctic Sunrise, which is our icebreaker, is currently docked down at the Pine Street Pier in Rainbow Harbor here in Long Beach. We've been here for the last 2 weekends or so, meeting folks from all around the greater LA area, certainly many folks in Long Beach. And so the Arctic Sunrise is a ship that Greenpeace has had now for, I believe, a couple decades. It was a ship that was built in the 70s. It was actually originally a seal hunting vessel, but ultimately Greenpeace acquired it, and it is one of the ships that we have used as a campaigning tool all around the world. In fact, prior to its arrival in California to the West Coast, it was actually on a research expedition in Antarctica over the winter, where we were able to document a lot of really interesting things about the sea life down there, as in an effort to protect some of the waters down in Antarctica. And previously, it has been part of direct actions, protesting offshore oil drilling. Sometimes it's used to demonstrate against illegal fishing, along with many other issues. So we're really excited to be here in Long Beach.
Well, the purpose for you pulling into these ports along the California, you're talking about the other coast too, are part of a larger campaign, especially with California, to bring attention to the Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco next month, September 12th to the 14th or 15th, as well as to bring attention to Governor Jerry Brown's climate legacy. What has been the governor's record, his track record with oil and gas extraction?
Yeah, it's a great question. So that definitely is one of our main objectives with our visit here in California, is to bring more awareness to folks and let them know how they can add their voice to calling for real climate leadership from Governor Brown. So Greenpeace has joined along with over 800 other organizations from around the world across California, across the United States, who have signed on to a campaign called Brown's Last Chance. And so this is looking at the opportunity that Governor Brown has in his final months in office to demonstrate real climate leadership by committing California to stopping the permits for new oil and gas drilling and fracking, as well as ultimately committing the state to phase out oil and gas extraction in a well-managed, thoughtful way that includes what's called a just transition. So this is making sure that the communities that have been left most vulnerable by living in close proximity to oil and gas infrastructure, and so experience the pollution that comes from that, as well as workers in the industry who we want to support to transition into new economies, that California ultimately makes a plan to phase out fossil fuel extraction that's in line with the Paris climate goals that were set forth a few years ago. And Governor Brown's, track record on climate change is really interesting.
Yeah.
He has talked really strong talk around the urgency of climate change. He has said, we are in a position right now where we have to make some uncomfortable choices potentially, that we need bold leadership, we need people to be thinking outside the box. And he has, made some commitments in California and pushed some things forward that are very positive. He has, right now California is on track to get half of all of our electricity from renewable energy by the year 2030. Governor Brown has committed to get 5 million electric vehicles on the road, California, by 2030 as well. And so he's made some great commitments to address the consumption of oil and gas here in California. What he has been very resistant to do anything about is to address the supply of fossil fuels in California. And we are actually one of the top 5 producers, extractors of oil across the country. Folks who are familiar with Kern County, and of course people who live in the greater Los Angeles area, are familiar with the site of active oil wells moving alongside the freeway, sometimes in different neighborhoods like
Sure.
Those in Wilmington or Carson or other areas. So, that's something that Governor Brown really needs to address if he wants to be considered a true climate leader, and if he wants to actually take a position and take action that will directly improve the public health of many of the communities here in California.
So the purview of the governor is onshore drilling and extracting, and he doesn't have any offshore. There's a portion offshore and the purview of California too, is it not?
That's right. So under Governor Brown, during his tenure, approximately 20,000 permits for new oil and gas wells have been granted. And that includes both onshore, and in some cases that means right next to homes, schools, businesses, hospitals, as well as offshore. Over 200 permits for new oil wells offshore in California state waters have been granted during the last term.
So what is he signaling now in specific that he wants to do regarding these permits?
So, we haven't seen a lot of movement from Governor Brown on, addressing fossil fuel supply. He's changed some of his messaging a little bit in recent months that maybe hints that he's, considering it a little bit more seriously. Up until that point, he had kind of largely ignored the calls to stop fracking in communities across California, both onshore and offshore. And it seems like now he may be more open to considering it, but we haven't seen any concrete moves. And we're really trying to point out to him and make sure that he sees this opportunity that as he steps onto the world stage and is playing host to the Global Climate Action Summit next month in San Francisco, he has an opportunity to really set a precedent and be a model for other leaders, either corporate leaders or leaders around the world, who might be looking to somebody like Governor Brown, who has this record as a climate leader, to take a really bold position on fossil fuel supply and do what science says is necessary to avoid the worst impacts of climate change.
So tell us, Mary, what is your strategy to engage him, to have constituents engage him, to appeal to a man with a really kind of idiosyncratic kind of political Jesuit, California, two sets and 2 terms of governor, service. I mean, how are you going to engage him? How are you getting and constituents to appeal to him?
Yeah. So, I think that's the beauty of the fact that so many diverse organizations are working on this campaign. We have, been working with folks all across California to put pressure on Governor Brown. There are youth who are taking a stand and saying, hey, for the sake of our future generations, please take action on fossil fuel supply. In fact, just last week, there were youth in Sacramento who risked arrest, and 6 of them were arrested in a sit-in that lasted several hours outside of the governor's office.
Right.
We've got local elected officials. Over 150 local elected officials at the municipal level have signed on to a letter encouraging Governor Brown to follow through with the demands of this campaign for the sake of their own communities and for the climate. So that's really promising. We actually even have some movement from leaders like Congressman Ro Khanna up in San Jose, who's come out in support of this and is looking to show his support for Governor Brown taking this action. And hopefully we'll see other members of Congress, join him in that effort. So there's certainly, from a lot of different levels of political leadership in California, people are raising their voices, constituents like, as I mentioned, youth and others. And then really there have been communities that have been calling on Governor Brown to do this for a long time. And they have been, the communities that have really been leading this are the folks who have been most affected. So the communities in Kern County, many of whom are, actually facing many sources of pollution, including from agriculture and others, are also facing the direct impacts from living next to oil fields, air pollution, water pollution, things like that. So the folks in Kern County in particular, and here in the LA area, they have really been leading on this for years and are continuing to highlight the need for, to protect public health for Governor Brown to do this. And, for Greenpeace's end, we've been mobilizing our supporters to, voice their concern. We've had hundreds of postcards sent in to Governor Brown from folks across California asking him to do this. In fact, just last week, we participated in an action at the Capitol and, as part of it, asked folks across California to make a phone call. And we
want to give the number for those listening?
Well, if folks wanted to take action, one of the things that they can do, we made it real easy, is if you text the word climate to 877-877, you can get linked up to information from us, and one of those is the phone number.
Oh, okay, fine.
Governor Brown's office, yeah. But, we had, over 500 folks opt in to make the phone call late last week. So we know that the governor's office is definitely hearing from people all across the state and really are wanting him to step up and lead.
If you've just joined us, folks, you're listening to OC Spotlight. I'm your host, Claudia Shamba. My guest is Mary Sweeters, climate and energy campaigner with Greenpeace, and we're talking about the appeal to California Governor Jerry Brown to step up, to turn down our greenhouse gas emission contribution in terms of oil and gas extraction permits in this state. And so one thing that was a step that I just wanted you to have an opportunity just to maybe unpackage a little bit more is one of them is there's the step one is to stop approving the new wells, and then there was a transition, a kind of plan to dial it down. I mean, does Greenpeace and Sierra Club and other entities, are people providing a plan that helps phase out this consumption, this extraction sector?
Yeah, that's a great question. So to reiterate the kind of campaign asks for the Brown's Last Chance campaign, what's being called the Brown's Last Chance work, is one, as you mentioned, to stop permitting any new wells to be drilled for oil and gas drilling and fracking. And then two, one I didn't mention earlier, but is a key part here, and it would particularly affect folks in the Los Angeles, Orange County area, is to establish what are called some safety buffers, so of a minimum of a half a mile. And so what this means is the oil and gas wells that are within a half a mile of homes, schools, workplaces, hospitals, which certainly occurs right now, those would need to be shut down. Those would be prioritized to be shut down first as a first measure of public health protection. And then as a part of that, those ones would be shut down, but then ultimately we'd want the state to make a plan to what's called a managed decline of fossil fuel production to ultimately phase out fossil fuel production in line with the commitments made from the Paris Agreement in 2015. And so in order to do this, I think one of the things is we look to folks, to leaders like Governor Brown to, work to craft that plan, figure out what are the things that need to happen in the state of California to enable such a plan to take place. And there's a lot of, I think, good work out there. Greenpeace and others have, labeled through very detailed reports that show here's what it would take, here's the scenario in which we would be transitioning over to a renewable energy economy and away from fossil fuels, and what the impact there would be. So there's certainly a lot of resources that someone like Governor Brown could look to as kind of guiding resources for a plan like this.
Sari, talk about the extent to which this, unlike maybe out-and-out climate change acknowledgement, the extent to which this is a bipartisan issue and how that aspect drives your campaign, your campaigns.
Sure. Well, I think, the impacts of climate change do not know political borders or districts or boundaries. And so we see people across California who are already starting to be affected by some of the impacts of climate change. So, of course, wildfires across the state that we're all very familiar with now. The climate change contributes to the conditions that fuel more intense and frequent wildfires. We've also seen some of the hottest temperatures on record. In fact, July was the all-time hottest month for California.
And how?
And so you have to think about what does that mean for the farm workers who sustain the agricultural industry that feeds the rest of this country? What does that mean for other folks who may work in outdoor, more vulnerable jobs? And I think, then what does it mean for maybe some of the tourism industry if we continue to see coastal erosion, sea level rise, or reduced snowpack in the mountains during the wintertime? So I think all of these things are happening across the state. They don't know the political boundaries, and so I think more and more our elected officials are going to have to pay attention to how their own communities and local economies are being affected by this.
Well, you could throw in the wildfires with the tourism and resource management and general land use decisions and all that change everything. It just if we've had it's been a month-to-month, is it, wildfire event in California since 2012?
Yep.
Something like so.
It's been pretty severe. And we also know that a lot of coastal communities, in fact, I believe the number is now 65 coastal communities, whether they're cities or counties, have taken some sort of official action, whether it's passed a resolution or sent a formal letter saying that they oppose expanded offshore drilling in state or federal waters. And so this is something, too, that, that's up and down the state, from as far north as Arcata down to San Diego County and all the communities in between. And so that's a lot. That's a significant size of California's coastal communities that are saying we don't want expanded offshore drilling because we're concerned about the health of our environment and our climate.
Well, I mentioned I opened with the Orange County Register editorial that was printed today. Does that offer any kind of leverage when you're appealing to Governor Brown?
I think it does. I think it's very helpful for someone like him to see that, hey, across the state in, a variety of places with across the political spectrum, they are saying this is an urgent problem, and we have contributed to it, and we are the ones who need to address it. It's sort of like the first rule: if you're in a hole, stop digging. And we need to look to someone like Governor Brown to, who has acknowledged and recognized the urgency of this crisis, to take the bold stance. If not him, who's going to do it? So I think it is very helpful for, a news source like the OC Register to be making these statements.
Right. Well, what's been the response of the public who've sauntered down over to that festive boardwalk? It's like a village in the middle of a city at Long Beach. How has the public responded to you in terms of light bulbs going off, activation? What kinds of stories can you tell us there?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's been great to see so many folks coming out. I would say in the time that the ship has been docked here in Long Beach, we've probably had just over 3,000 people come through, whether it was taking a tour or on one of our public events. And people have been, very positive to, responded very positively to our message. We've had, I think, just from one weekend, we had about 250 people sign a postcard, a personal letter to Governor Brown that they, took a few minutes to write themselves. A lot of folks signed the petition to Governor Brown as well. So I think that's been very positive, and even just kind of verbally hearing from folks after we were talking with them, people were really inspired to say, yeah, I see this, what's going on. I see it right here in our backyards, and I want to protect the health and safety of my children or my neighbors, and I'm concerned about climate change, and that's been really positive to see.
That's a kind of a general accounting. Is there any specific kind of reactions that really spoke to you that you recall pretty vividly still?
Yeah, well, I think what's stuck with me has been people coming up to me after, we've kind of presented the campaign and talked to folks and saying, yeah, I live, just a few miles from here, and I have seen these oil rigs, next to me on the freeway, or I've looked out and seen the Thumbs Island out there, and I'm just used to it, and so I hadn't really thought about it. And now I realize those are active drilling wells that are emitting toxic chemicals and are contributing to climate change, and I want to do something about it. And I think that has been very heartening to see that, that's the realization is there and is activating folks. And we've also heard from people. We had a reception last weekend from folks in Kern County with people in Kern County and in Los Angeles who came together, who are all organizers who have been, basically fighting the impacts from the oil industry for decades, coming together to be able to, share stories with each other and to strategize about how are we going to work to protect our communities going into the future. So that was certainly a great moment to see those folks coming together and, feeling very hopeful about how to move forward.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Mary, how hopeful are you that appropriate measures, sufficient inroads are going to be made to phase out fossil fuel consumption in order to reverse the current trends?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I get asked that from time to time. I still remain hopeful. I don't think I would do this if I wasn't.
Yes.
And I think I can probably speak for many of my colleagues and comrades in the larger movement who believe in the power that people have to make a change, who believe that we should not allow corporations to dictate the policies that get made that affect our day-to-day lives, that affect the quality of our water and our air and the kind of very balance of our planet. And I think hearing from the folks like I just mentioned who live in places in California where they have grown up next to 1,000 oil rigs working day and night, who still say, nope, we are going to make progress little bit by little bit, and it's going to ultimately push our politicians to do the right thing. We're reading more and more about people getting elected into office who are recognizing this crisis and who are going to do everything they can to make a difference. So that's certainly, I think, that's very heartening. And I think more and more people are becoming aware of, what sort of, what the fossil fuel industry, what the oil industry has done over the last few decades in terms of hiding the information, the facts that we know about climate change that they knew decades back.
Yes, many chronicles now.
Exactly. It's well documented, and more people are becoming aware of it and recognizing that it has, it's threatened the integrity of our political process, and they want to hold those companies accountable.
So you've given us there's the postcard campaign, and there's Texting Climate 877-877, and the Artic Sunrise will be heading up. I guess it'll be heading north. Anything? How is it the other ways of easily following Greenpeace? Any other efforts? Next events coming up that you'd like to post us as we close the interview?
Sure. So definitely, I would say the fastest way is what you mentioned: texting the word climate to 877-877. That will send you the link to our petition if you haven't signed it already, but it'll also keep you looped in on what events are coming up. And I would say the one thing to look out for if you're on our email list, or if you want to get more information of how you can join us at the September 8th Rise for Climate Jobs and Justice. We'll be marching in San Francisco along with 50,000 of our closest friends. And we'd love to have folks join the Greenpeace contingent and march with us and our partners who've been working on this campaign to push Governor Brown to be a real climate leader. So if you'd like to do that, we'd love to get you in touch, get in touch with us. And we'd love to have you either visit our ship when it's up in San Francisco, if you missed it while it was here in Long Beach, or just to march with us to show that, real force of people power looking to our elected officials.
I so recommend that tour. I took it 2 weekends ago, and I thank you again for that, Mary, and all of the crew that are helping set up this whole interview. And there are things that you find out, folks, you didn't know to ask about that are there that explain just what a heady mission that Greenpeace is on all over the world, and the kind of data that Greenpeace is racking up to explain what the heck is going, like this forensic mission that Greenpeace is on there. Well, you're much in demand as you're leading all these campaigns up to the Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco next month. Thank you, Mary Sweeters, for being on OC Spotlight today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
My guest was Mary Sweeters, Arctic campaigner and with Greenpeace, and climate and energy campaigner too, in advance of the upcoming Global Climate Action Summit and the Brown's Last Chance campaign as well. That's all the time we have. I want to thank once again Paul Roberts for engineering today's live show. Always, we have more on tap in the following weeks. Thank you for listening, everyone. Talk to you next week.
You've been listening to another episode of OC Spotlight, brought to you by the good folks here at Orange County's only community radio station, OC Talk Radio.net.